All right, Christine has joined us this evening for Monet Meets Debussy, the part of the show where we get to visit the wonderful world of art and kind of be taken by the hand and guided through so many amazing artists, many different styles and many different time periods. How are you doing tonight?
Yeah, that's right. I'm doing pretty well. I've had a good day so far.
Me too, and for the most part, I've been lucky to stay relatively dry. I'm going to try to keep that up, but I know that it's getting a little serious out there. I hope our listeners stay safe. But while they are maybe staying indoors, they can start to imagine some artwork. So what are we going to do tonight?
Yeah, so we've got something a little bit different today. So we'll be talking about a sculpture.
Have we done a sculpture? I don't know if we've done one before.
I think we've only done like installations, which are a little bit different. Mm-hmm. So I think this is our first sculpture.
Oh, so we're branching out?
Yeah,
it's
and
great.
I took a little bit of a cue from you because you did mention this artist. That's a hint.
Okay.
And we'll also be talking about some philosophy to go with it.
Well, this sounds like it's right up our alley. So let's jump in and hear this description.
Cast in bronze is a 6 feet tall, towering, gaunt figure leaning forward at an angle as if he had been caught mid-movement in a long stride. Amid a loping walk in an exaggerated forward motion, his thin legs are nothing but lines meeting together in a triangular shape. He keeps his arms, also as thin as sticks, close to his body. The figure is skeletal, yet covered in an unpolished, rough surface that the artist tirelessly worked over, covered with frenzied marks, and that exude a sense of anxiety or desolation. Between the textured marks casting shadows over the dark bronze, you can barely make out what resembles basic anatomical features: a nose first, then wide blank eyes, also a chest and a stomach, but barely so. Is it a life-size figure, you ask yourself? Well, it is dimensionally tall, yet feels very small. The texture of the skin feels tangible, but also indecipherable. The more you seek to study the figure, his frail presence seems to disappear before your eyes. With no specific features to set him apart individually, his strange physique becomes obscure and anonymous. His feet are moored to the bronze base, holding his body up, yet it is as if he is drifting away. He brings a sense of energy to the space, but he is also untied to the world around him.
Ooh, so that was a very interesting description. 6 feet tall, the sculpture is. That's about 2 meters. And man, I can't imagine. I mean, I can imagine what this is, but actually 6 feet tall is a very imposing structure.
It is, yet, it's not at the same time. The thing is so big, yet feels so small. I think I had a really hard time describing this one because the more I looked at it, the more I saw different things.
Oh, really?
And the more I researched it, the more I read different things. So everyone has something to say about this artwork, which is, I think, why it's become so famous.
So what is this very tall statue?
So it's called Walking Man 1. Very simple title.
Yes.
And it's a bronze cast made in 1961 by the sculptor Alberto Giacometti. Now, it was one of 6 editions. There are 6 of these men. They look very similar. And these were made during the height of Giacometti's career when his artistic style had matured.
Oh, okay. So, I'm a little bit familiar with Giacometti. There's actually a piece you can find in Korea at a museum up north in Wonju. And I have to say, whenever I see a Giacometti, it's so obvious that it's him. It's very unique and very distinct style of, like you mentioned earlier, like a gaunt figure, if you will, like something very thin, right?
Yeah, he has a very distinct style, and because of that, actually, there were a lot of copycats as well.
Really? Ooh.
Yeah, and this particular sculpture, actually, when it was sold a couple of years ago, it was the most expensive sculpture to, be sold at the time. And I think the only thing that beat it afterwards is his own sculpture.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So he was a sculptor by trade. I mentioned I've seen a couple of his works before, but I'm actually really interested in the kind of reasons, and I can't wait to jump into why he chose this particular style. I know a lot of artists out there, they kind of find their niche or something that they're very good at, or they want to explore deeper, and they really go for it. And you said that by the time this was made in 1961, he was kind of at the height of his, style and what he wanted to convey from this artwork.
Yeah, it was definitely toward the latter end of his life. And he actually, he passed away, the doctors think, from overworking and just from his passion in the studio. So, he really pushed and gave everything he had to creating this unique style. Now, a lot of his works, they feel very unfinished, like sketches. And this is because, he was never really satisfied with what he was making. So his works began as plaster or clay, and then very few of them ever made it to becoming a bronze sculpture. This one was a lucky one to survive, because usually he was very cruel and he would destroy them, or, he didn't want them to be seen. He was never quite happy with what he was making. And, even though there are so many similar figures, like I said earlier, they're so difficult to describe.
Yeah.
And I think it's because he never really made up his mind even towards the end. He did say that he was more happy with these works, but he was always, single-mindedly working towards achieving his artistic vision, and he never quite figured it out.
Oh, man, I wonder what it's like to, just try to dedicate so much of your time, work you're literally to death on perfecting this vision.
Yeah.
Was he always into this style, I guess? Is that, because I know that, he's very famous for these kind of just like stick figures, right?
Exactly, yeah, that's the question, like Picasso. Did he always just make stick figures?
Yeah.
Can't I make stick figures as well? Well, he actually came from quite the background. So he was the son of a post-impressionist painter, Giovanni Giacometti, who was also pretty famous at his time. And he was interested in art from an early age. Now, he was born and raised in Switzerland, but he moved to Paris in his early 20s to study under a sculptor named Antoine Bourdelle. That was an associate of a Rodin, who, is one of the big names in the world of sculpture. And now Giacometti, at the time, he could, make these beautifully realistic sculptures. And you could see from his busts that he created then that he had a great amount of talent and skill. So it wasn't, these stick figures didn't come from a place of, lack of skill or anything like that. And from there on, he did start experimenting more with cubism and surrealism. And he came in contact with a lot of big-name artists, people like André Breton and Miro and Francis Bacon. But his, works and interests were a little bit different, even when he was a part of those cubism or surrealism movements.
Well, it's really interesting that he, I wouldn't guess that he would have been so trained that he can do very realistic busts, but it's almost like you need to master the fundamentals in order to develop your own style and, kind of, I would say, just add on to what's already being out there. You need to understand what is out there and how to do it. And then I think that's where he really was able.
Yeah. And he had a really solid foundation of what was going on at the time and what sculpture meant for the people at the time. And, he decided that's not what he wanted. So he actually really more so connected with philosophers, which I thought was interesting. He was good friends with Simone de Beauvoir and also Jean-Paul Sartre.
Oh,
And
okay.
he would take, these late night silent walks with Samuel Beckett. And so, it influenced a lot of his work, and his work actually influenced philosophers as well. They were like colleagues.
Oh.
And Giacometti did visit Picasso's studio a lot, but they were not on good terms. So Picasso would always make fun of Giacometti for constantly repeating the same thing. And Giacometti would make fun of Picasso for making decorative, superficial work.
Oh.
Yeah.
They had, I guess, a different interpretation or perception of what art was and what it meant. But that's funny that they were kind of at odds with each other.
Yeah, and I understand. I could see it in their styles. So Picasso, he liked to experiment a lot and try different formal things. And it's very stylistic. But Giacometti, he was just single-minded. And I think he was seeking his own truth rather than some sort of, superficial artistic style. And he was, thinking a lot about the act of looking, more philosophical questions about presence and absence. And, I started to wonder, what was this thing that he was always pushing towards? What was he seeking?
That's interesting that, presence and absence are the ideas that really are kind of surrounding, because when you look at something like that, you can tell that, they say when you sculpt something, you take away everything that doesn't look like how you want it to look. And with him, he gets down to almost the bare bones. He takes away so much to get to, I don't know, is he trying to get to the core or the heart of something?
Yeah, I think that might be it. I think you're getting onto a good point there. He's such a strange character. So when he first started making these tiny sculptures when World War II broke out, he said that they just kept shrinking against his own will. And so his sculptures at the time, they were no larger than the size of a finger.
Really?
Yeah, but then he was able to, after being in Switzerland for a while, return to Paris after the war, and his sculptures started becoming really big again.
Oh.
And at that time, he describes this existential moment that he has when he comes out of the theater and looks at the waiter at a cafe, and he realizes that he had been living this life where he felt like he was looking at the world through the lens of a photograph. And he was able to finally see things as they are, really be present. And he says that the waiter had a sculptural presence as he leaned forward towards him with his eyes fixed in an absolute immobility. And
wow.
I think the way he describes it really reminds me of this sculpture that he made, because, the man walking there, he has really big eyes, and they're just kind of blankly staring at you. And they feel very present yet absent at the same time.
And it's funny because, I'm looking at a picture of this sculpture and you don't realize the size of it because it's like, oh, I can imagine it the size of a finger, or it can be 6 feet tall. But, the idea that all of his sculptures were kind of from his experiences and just, kind of what hit him at that moment was really, really inspirational. I wonder, he was just kind of struck by genius.
Yeah. And, when he made this sculpture, it was actually for his exhibition that he was at the time also pretty unwilling to be a part of, but he was finally convinced into it, and his friend Sartre wrote an introduction to the exhibition. And in it, he talks about what sets Giacometti's works apart. Now, he compares them to Greek statues, which, are all about this perfection in beauty. And the way that Sartre puts it is that, the eternity of stone is synonymous with inertia. So by making statues perfect, fixed in eternity, they also become more static and lose the sense of vitality, I think. Because, when you look at these Greek gods and goddesses, they're nothing more than beautiful, perfect rocks, but they don't feel human.
Yeah.
And Giacometti says that, Sartre says that while Giacometti's works are less figurative, they feel a lot more alive and real than these Greek statues, because they are fragile, they are less eternal, and as he says, they are more nearly human.
Wow. Well, that is some amazing and very interesting stuff. I never realized all this information about Giacometti. I'm definitely going to have to go and check him out some more. Thank you so much for coming on today and sharing this. And we'll see you back here next week.
I'll see you next week.